Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Story Path English. I am so happy you are here with us today. Close your eyes for just one moment. Imagine that the lights have gone out. It is completely dark. Now, imagine that the world has gone silent. You cannot hear the birds singing. You cannot hear the wind in the trees. You cannot even hear the sound of your own voice. For most of us, this is a nightmare. But for the person in today's story, this was her everyday reality. Today, I want to tell you about a girl who lived in a world of total darkness and total silence. Everyone thought she was lost. They thought she could never learn, never speak, and never understand the world. But this girl did something miraculous. She broke through the silence. She became a world-famous author, a powerful speaker, and a light for millions of people. Her name was Helen Keller. How did a girl who could not see or hear change the course of history? Stay with me, and if you find inspiration in stories like this, please subscribe to help us grow our path of stories together. Our story begins in a small, quiet town called Tuscumbia, Alabama, in the year 1880. Helen was born as a healthy, happy baby. She could see the bright flowers in her garden. She could hear her mother's gentle voice. She was a bright child, starting to walk and say her first words. But when she was only 19 months old, she became very sick. She had a terrible fever. In those days, doctors did not have the medicine we have today. The fever eventually went away, but it left a dark shadow behind. One morning, Helen's mother noticed that Helen did not blink when the sun shone in her eyes. A few days later, she noticed that Helen did not move when a loud bell rang near her ears. The truth was devastating. Helen was now blind and deaf. Imagine being a tiny child in that situation. Suddenly, the world is gone. You are trapped inside your own body because she could not hear, she could not learn to speak. She lived in a thick, heavy fog. As Helen grew older, she became frustrated and angry. She wanted to tell her mother she was hungry or that she was tired, but she didn't have the words. She would scream, she would kick, and she would break things. People in the town looked at her and shook their heads. They called her a wild animal. They told her parents to send her away to an institution. But Helen's mother, Kate, refused to give up. She knew there was a brilliant mind trapped inside that wild girl. She began to search for help. This search led her to a woman who would change Helen's life forever, Anne Sullivan. It was a warm spring day in 1887. Helen was nearly 7 years old. She stood on the porch of her house, sensing that something big was happening. She felt the vibration of footsteps on the wooden floor. She smelled the perfume of a stranger. That stranger was Anne Sullivan. Anne was young, only 20 years old, and she had her own struggles. She had been nearly blind herself as a child and had lived in a poorhouse. She understood what it felt like to be alone and forgotten. Anne brought a gift for Helen, a doll. As Helen played with the doll, Anne took Helen's hand. Using her fingers, Anne spelled 4 letters into Helen's palm, D-O-L-L. Helen felt the movements. She thought it was a game. She imitated the finger movements and spelled it back to Anne, but she didn't understand what it meant. She didn't know that those movements represented an object. For weeks, Anne tried to teach Helen more words. She spelled C-A-K-E-M-U-G and M-I-L-K. But Helen was frustrated. She didn't understand that everything in the world has a name. One day, Helen got so angry that she threw her new doll on the floor and smashed it into pieces. She felt no regret. In her world, there was no meaning, only shadows and confusion. Then came the miracle. It happened on the 5th of April, 1887. Anne took Helen outside to the water pump in the garden. She placed one of Helen's hands under the cool, rushing water. As the water flowed over Helen's hand, Anne took the other hand and spelled the word over and over again. W-A-T-E-R. Suddenly, Helen stood still. A change came over her face. The look of confusion disappeared. She realized that the cool thing flowing over her hand had a name, and that name was the finger movements in her palm. In that moment, the mystery of language was revealed to her. A tiny spark of light flew into her dark world. Helen dropped to the ground and touched the earth. She looked at Anne and reached for her hand. Anne spelled G-R-O-U-N-D. Helen pointed to the trees, the pump, the house. By the end of that single day, Helen had learned 30 new words. She wasn't an animal anymore. She was a human being with a voice. That night, for the first time in her life, Helen went to bed happy. She looked forward to the next day. From that moment on, Helen was like a sponge. She wanted to know the name of everything. She and Anne became inseparable. Anne was not just a teacher. She was Helen's interpreter and her best friend. But Helen's journey was just beginning. She didn't want to just know words. She wanted to learn like everyone else. She learned to read Braille books with raised dots that she could feel with her fingertips. She learned to write using a special frame. But then she decided to do something even more difficult. She wanted to learn how to speak. Think about how you learn to speak. You listen to your parents and you copy the sounds. But Helen could not hear any sounds. To learn, she would place her hand on Anne's face. Her thumb went on Anne's throat to feel the vibrations. Her fingers went on Anne's lips and nose to feel the movement and the air. It was incredibly difficult. She practiced for thousands of hours, repeating sounds over and over. "I am not dumb now," she finally said. Her voice sounded different, and it was hard for some people to understand, but it was her voice. She had conquered the silence. As Helen became a teenager, her dreams grew bigger. She wanted to go to college. People laughed. "How can a blind and deaf girl go to university?" they asked. But Helen did not listen to the word no. In 1900, she entered Radcliffe College, one of the best schools in America. College life was an immense struggle. Anne Sullivan sat beside Helen in every single lecture, spelling the professor's words into Helen's hand as fast as they spoke. Helen's fingers would ache, and her eyes, though they could not see, would grow tired from the mental strain. She had to study twice as hard as any other student, but in 1904, she did it. Helen Keller graduated with honors. She was the first deaf-blind person in history to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree. Now that she was educated, Helen had a choice. She could live a quiet life at home, but she felt a responsibility. She remembered the darkness and the frustration of her childhood. She knew there were millions of other people, blind people, poor people, workers who felt just as lost as she once did. She began to write. She wrote her first book, The Story of My Life, while she was still in college. It became an instant success. People all over the world were amazed by her spirit. She began to travel, first across America and then across the world. She visited over 35 countries. Imagine Helen on a stage in front of thousands of people. She could not see the audience, and she could not hear their applause, but she could feel the vibration of their cheering through the floorboards. She spoke about the rights of the blind. She told governments that blind people were not stupid or useless. They just needed a chance. They needed books they could read and jobs they could do. Because of Helen, schools for the blind were opened and laws were changed to help the disabled. But Helen cared about everyone who suffered. She spoke out against child labor. She fought for the right of women to vote. She was a woman of great courage who was never afraid to speak her mind, even when her ideas were unpopular. She met every American president from Grover Cleveland to Lyndon B. Johnson. She met famous people like Alexander Graham Bell and Mark Twain. Mark Twain once said, "The two most interesting characters of the 19th century are Napoleon and Helen Keller." Through all these years, Anne Sullivan stayed by her side. They worked together for nearly 50 years. When Anne's health began to fail, and she finally passed away in 1936, it was the greatest heartbreak of Helen's life. For a moment, it felt like the darkness was returning, too. But Helen remembered what Anne had taught her, to be brave. Helen continued her work with a new companion, Polly Thompson, traveling to help soldiers who had lost their sight in World War II. Helen Keller lived to be 87 years old. She passed away peacefully in 1968, but she never really left us. Every time a blind child picks up a book in Braille, Helen is there. Every time a person with a disability fights for their rights, Helen is there. She once said, "The best and most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or even touched. They must be felt with the heart." Helen's story is not just a story about being blind or deaf. It is a story about the power of the human mind to overcome any obstacle. It is a story about the importance of teachers like Anne Sullivan, who see the potential in someone when no one else does. And most importantly, it is a story about hope. Helen showed us that no matter how dark or quiet our lives may seem, there is always a way to find the light. Think about your own life today. Are you facing a wall? Do you feel like you are in a room with no windows? Remember the little girl at the water pump. Remember that one word, WATER, changed everything. Your one word might be a new language, a new skill, or the courage to ask for help. Thank you for walking this story path with me today. Helen Keller's life reminds us that we are only limited by our own imagination. If a girl who could not see or hear could travel the world and write books, what can you do with the gifts you have? If you enjoyed this journey, please hit the like button and share this story with someone who needs a little bit of hope today. And tell me in the comments, what is an impossible goal you are working toward? I read every single one of your comments, and they truly inspire me. Don't forget to subscribe to Story Path English for more stories of courage, history, and life. Keep listening, keep learning, and remember your voice matters, just like Helen's did. I will see you on our next journey. Until then, keep your heart open to the beautiful things. Good night, my friends.